The phone call came on a Tuesday, shattering the meticulous peace of my retirement. For a man who spent 30 years as a forensic accountant, untangling the lies people tell with numbers, my life now was a study in quiet order. My brownstone here in Beacon Hill was my sanctuary, each floorboard holding a history that I respected with predictable routines. Coffee at 7, newspaper until 8, a walk through the Boston Common if the weather was kind. But Clara's voice on the line was a chaotic variable I hadn't planned for. "Dad?" She was crying, trying to hide it, but I could hear the tremor, the same way I could spot a doctored ledger. "I'm so sorry to ask, but Ethan, he lost his job." Of course, I said yes. This house, her childhood home, was always her safe harbor. 3 days later, they arrived. Clara hugged me on the doorstep, her relief palpable and genuine. But Ethan was different. His handshake was firm, but his eyes weren't on me. They were scanning the entryway, the high ceilings, the mahogany staircase, appraising. It was the first red flag, a tiny misplaced decimal point in the grand equation of our reunion. My home, passed down through 3 generations, was not just a house, it was a testament to a life of careful planning, and Ethan looked at it with an unnerving hunger. The second red flag came from Mr. Finch, the retired history professor who lived across the street. We were tending our respective rose bushes, a silent Saturday morning ritual, when he nodded towards my house. "Arthur," he said, his voice a dry rustle of old paper, "your son-in-law is a very observant young man." I paused, trowel in hand. "How so, Alistair?" "Saw him outside yesterday evening," Mr. Finch continued, peering over his glasses. "Just walking the perimeter, looking up at the windows, one by one, as if he were memorizing the architecture." He chuckled, oblivious. Probably just admiring the historic brickwork, but I knew it wasn't the brickwork he was admiring. It was the security, or lack thereof. The suspicion solidified that night, over a dinner of roasted chicken I had prepared. The conversation was pleasant enough, filled with Clara's stories about her new volunteer work at the library. But then Ethan leaned forward, his practiced smile not quite reaching his eyes. "Arthur, this is a magnificent house," he began. "Clara tells me you handle all your finances yourself. You must have some serious security measures in place. A safe, perhaps?" Clara nearly dropped her fork. "Ethan, what a strange thing to ask." "Just being cautious, honey," he said smoothly, turning his gaze back to me. "A man of Arthur's age living alone, it pays to be prepared." I kept my expression neutral, the way I once did when interviewing a CEO I knew was cooking the books. "I'm a careful man, Ethan." The air was thick with unspoken tension. I saw it then, the predatory gleam in his eyes, the subtle calculation. He wasn't making conversation, he was conducting reconnaissance. And I, the old fool he thought me to be, was his primary target. The quiet order of my life was officially over. A game had begun, and he had no idea I'd spent my entire career mastering the rules. The rest of dinner was a masterclass in psychological chess. Ethan, believing he was the grandmaster, continued to probe. "So, that's safe upstairs," he said, pushing a piece of chicken around his plate. "Is it a combination lock, or one of those new biometric ones?" Clara shot him a warning look, but Ethan ignored it. His focus was entirely on me. "It's an older model," I replied, my voice even. "Reliable." Right. "But what about a key?" he pressed. "Most of those old ones have a key override, don't they? For emergencies." The question hung in the air. It was too specific, too knowledgeable. Clara, sensing the shift in the atmosphere, tried to intervene. "Ethan, honestly, Dad's security isn't dinner conversation. I'm just thinking about you, honey," he said, turning to her with that disarming smile. "If something were to happen to Arthur, God forbid, you'd need to know where all the important things are. The will, insurance papers, the key." There it was again, the key. My daughter looked between us, a crease of confusion on her forehead. "What key?" Ethan's smile widened, a predator sensing a victory. "The one in your dad's study, in the top drawer of his antique desk, the small brass one." A profound silence fell over the table. How could he possibly know that? The words came out of me, colder and sharper than I intended. How do you know anything about a key in my study? For a fleeting second, his mask slipped. I saw a flash of cold, hard calculation in his eyes before the charming son-in-law returned. "Oh man, sorry," he said, rubbing his forehead theatrically. "I had a splitting headache last week, remember, Clara? You told me to check Arthur's medicine cabinet for some aspirin. I must have opened the wrong drawer by mistake. Didn't mean to snoop." Clara nodded immediately, the loyal wife. "Oh, that's right. You were in agony." But I remembered that day perfectly. He'd been upstairs for nearly 20 minutes, claiming an upset stomach. Ample time for more than a simple mistake. "The aspirin is in the bathroom, Ethan," I said quietly, letting the statement settle. "It always has been." His jaw tightened for a fraction of a second. "Right. Must have been the pain making me loopy." After dinner, as Clara and Ethan went upstairs, I insisted on cleaning the kitchen myself. It was my ritual, but tonight, it was also a necessity. The simple, methodical act of washing, rinsing, and drying each plate gave my mind the space it needed to work. Every question he'd asked, every casual observation, now clicked into place like tumblers in a lock. This wasn't just curiosity. It was a targeted intelligence-gathering operation. Once the kitchen was restored to its usual pristine state, I made my way upstairs. Their guest room door was shut. I walked past it to my study at the end of the hall. I always left the door perfectly aligned with the frame. Tonight, it was ajar by less than a quarter of an inch, a detail no one else would ever notice. I pushed it open. The room, at first glance, was exactly as I had left it. My leather-bound books stood in their precise rows. My reading glasses were on the blotter, but my training screamed that something was wrong. I moved to the antique mahogany desk. The top drawer, where I kept my most important papers, was not quite flush. It protruded by the width of a credit card. My stomach clenched. I pulled it open. Inside, the manila folders were in the correct order, but they had been handled. The crisp edges were slightly softened. The file for my will, usually at the back, was now third from the front. Someone had been through my life on paper. My fingers traced the underside of the drawer's top edge, where a small brass key had been taped for 30 years. The tape was still there, but the key was gone. The violation was absolute. He hadn't just made a mistake looking for aspirin. He had systematically searched my private sanctuary and found exactly what he was looking for. The game was no longer just in my mind. It was real, and he had just made his first move. I slid the drawer shut, the soft click echoing the finality of my discovery. The key was gone. My suspicion had now hardened into cold, indisputable fact. Ethan was not just an observant guest. He was a thief in waiting. But instead of confronting him, I did what I had done for 30 years when faced with deception. I gathered more data. I went through my nightly routine, every action deliberate and normal. I brushed my teeth. I changed into my pajamas. I set my book on the nightstand. To anyone watching, I was simply an old man preparing for a peaceful night's sleep. But sleep was an impossibility. I lay in the darkness of my bedroom, my eyes open, staring at the ceiling. My mind, a machine trained to find patterns in chaos, was whirring. The house settled around me with its familiar groans, but I was listening for something else. And at 12:47 in the morning, I heard it. A floorboard creaked in the hallway. Not the guest room, where Clara slept, but from the main staircase. It was a heavier, more deliberate sound. Ethan. He was on the move. I remained perfectly still, regulating my breathing into the deep, even rhythm of sleep. I heard his soft footsteps cross the living room below, moving towards the front of the house where the acoustics were best for a private call. Silently, I eased myself out of bed, my bare feet finding the cold hardwood without a sound. I crept to the old heating vent near my door, an architectural quirk of this brownstone that sometimes carried whispers from the first floor. And then I heard his voice, a low murmur he thought was safely swallowed by the night. "Yeah, it's me," he whispered. "Everyone's asleep." My hand found my phone on the nightstand. With trembling fingers, I opened the voice recording app. Whatever he said next, the world was going to hear it. The old man's definitely loaded. Ethan's voice drifted up, clearer now. I found the bank statements, investment portfolios, the whole 9 yards. We're talking serious money here, Tony. We. The confirmation of an accomplice sent a chill down my spine. This was more organized than I thought. Tomorrow night, he continued, his voice gaining confidence. Clara's got her book club. Every Tuesday, 7 to 9 in the evening. It gives us the perfect window. I pressed the red record button, the small icon glowing like a drop of blood in the darkness. I already have the safe key, he boasted. Grabbed it this afternoon. The old fool keeps everything in there. Cash, jewelry from his late wife, probably more financial records. It's perfect. The old fool. Rage, hot and pure, rose in my chest, but I forced it down. Emotion was a liability. I needed to be cold. I needed to be a professional. Look, I know you're worried about the timeline, Ethan said, his voice dropping. But my gambling debts aren't going away. These guys, they aren't exactly patient, if you know what I mean. This has to happen now. So that was it. The classic, pathetic motive. He wasn't a master criminal. He was just a desperate man drowning in his own stupidity, and he was trying to pull my daughter down with him. Arthur's just some lonely old widower, he sneered, and that was the part that truly broke something inside me. He's probably grateful for the company. He has no idea what's coming. The call ended a few moments later. I heard him move around downstairs, then the quiet footsteps ascending the stairs. I stopped the recording and slid the phone under my pillow, just as his shadow passed my doorway. He paused for a moment, listening, before continuing to the guest room. I lay there in the silent darkness, the recording a toxic secret on my phone. He planned to rob me. He planned to use my daughter as his alibi. And then he planned to vanish, dragging her into his vortex of debt and danger. He thought he was hunting a helpless old man. He had no idea. He had just walked into the crosshairs of a retired forensic accountant. He had no idea that I wasn't the prey. I was the trap. Lying in the pre-dawn stillness, I felt the initial, white-hot rage cool into something far more dangerous. Purpose. The grief of the betrayal was a sharp physical ache in my chest, a pain for my daughter who had placed her heart in the hands of a viper. But grief would not solve this. A forensic accountant does not mourn a fraudulent entry. He corrects it. And Ethan was a fraudulent entry in the ledger of my family. I would correct him. When I came downstairs at my usual 7 o'clock, the aroma of fresh coffee already filled the air. I had a role to play. Clara was the first to greet me, her smile as warm as the morning sun slanting through the kitchen windows. "Morning, Dad. Sleep well?" "Like a log, sweetheart," I said, mustering a convincing yawn. "I feel like I haven't slept that deeply in years." Ethan appeared a few minutes later, looking rested and confident. The predator who believes his territory is secure. He settled at the table, accepting the cup of coffee I offered him. "You're looking a little tired, Arthur," he said, his voice slick with false concern. I shuffled to my chair, making my movements a little slower, a little stiffer than usual. Just the stress of having a full house, I suppose. It's wonderful having you both here, of course, but it does wear an old man out. "You should take it easy today," Ethan suggested, a little too quickly. "I think you're right," I said, taking a slow sip of my coffee. "In fact, I'm so exhausted I might need one of my sleeping pills tonight. The doctor gave them to me for nights when my mind won't shut off. Powerful stuff. One pill, and I am dead to the world until morning." I watched him over the rim of my cup. It was a subtle shift, but I saw it. The tension in his shoulders relaxed. A smug satisfaction flickered in his eyes before being quickly suppressed. The bait had been taken. He now believed his path was clear, that his victim would be blissfully unconscious during the commission of his crime. "Well, you have to be careful with that stuff," he said, the picture of a caring son-in-law. "But a good night's sleep is important at your age." At your age. The condescension was a constant, grating note in his voice. He saw me not as a man, but as a collection of elderly stereotypes, forgetful, frail, and easily manipulated. It was the most valuable weapon I had against him. I finished my breakfast and stood up slowly from the table. "Well, I think I'll run a few errands this morning. Need to pick up a few things at the hardware store." "Need any help, Dad?" Clara asked. No, you two enjoy the quiet. I won't be long." As I walked to the front door, I could feel Ethan's eyes on my back. He was likely replaying his plan, confirming the timeline. The old man is leaving the house. The daughter is occupied. The house is his to survey one last time before the main event. I stepped out into the crisp Boston air. The hardware store was my first stop, yes, but not for the reasons he would assume. I wasn't going to buy a new lock or a better alarm system. That was what a normal victim would do. I had something far more elegant in mind. Ethan thought he was a cunning wolf circling a sleeping sheep. He was about to find out he was a mouse walking into a trap designed by a cat. My basement workshop was a place of meticulous order, a sanctuary of logic and precision. It was here I began to assemble the components of Ethan's downfall. The confetti cannon I bought from the party supply aisle was a simple, elegant piece of engineering. A spring-loaded plunger, a cardboard tube, and a payload of harmless paper. I emptied the paper and replaced it with a custom blend, 2 bags of ultrafine silver and gold glitter, the kind that clings to fabric, skin, and hair with a relentless tenacity, the kind that would serve as a shimmering, undeniable brand of guilt. The challenge was calibration. The trigger needed to be sensitive enough to activate when a hand reached deep into the drawer, but stable enough not to go off from the simple act of opening it. I spent nearly an hour testing the mechanism with a wooden ruler, adjusting the spring tension until it was perfect. I then carefully positioned the modified cannon inside the desk drawer, hidden beneath a layer of old photographs and assorted buttons. To a casual observer, it was just a drawer full of memories. To an intruder with a specific target, it was a tripwire. My next stop was an electronics store downtown. I found a clerk, a young man named Marcus, who listened patiently as I described my needs. "I'm looking for a security camera," I explained. "Something small, wireless, with excellent night vision and motion, activated recording." "Worried about break-ins, sir?" he asked. "Something like that," I said. He recommended a compact model, no larger than a deck of cards, with a magnetic base and a direct feed to a smartphone app. It was perfect. I paid in cash, the small box in the bag beside me feeling like a secret weapon. Back home, while Clara was out for a walk, and Ethan was supposedly on the phone with job prospects, I got to work setting the stage. In my study, I tested several locations for the camera, using the app on my phone to check the live feed. On the bookshelf, the angle was too wide. Behind the lamp, the base was visible. Finally, I found it, a small gap between 2 thick volumes on my nightstand. The camera's black casing disappeared into the shadows of the book spines. From the app, the view was flawless, a high-definition panoramic shot of the desk, the drawer, and the center of the room. I switched the camera to motion-activated mode to conserve its 8-hour battery life and tested the night vision. The infrared image was crystal clear. Every detail of Ethan's face, every flicker of greed and surprise would be captured. The setup was complete, an elegant, 3-pronged trap. The psychological bait of the sleeping pills, the physical evidence of the glitter bomb, and the irrefutable visual record from the hidden camera. I headed downstairs just as Clara and Ethan were starting to prepare for dinner. He looked relaxed, confident, utterly unaware that upstairs a stage had been meticulously set for his final performance. He believed he was the director of this little play. He had no idea the script had been rewritten, and that he was no longer the hero of his own story. He was simply the fool, about to walk into the spotlight. The quiet hum of the house settled in after Clara left for her book club, her cheerful, "See you in a few hours," echoing behind her. It was 7:15. The window for Ethan's crime was officially open. I settled into my armchair in the living room, feigning a light doze. Ethan sat on the couch, scrolling through his phone, but I could feel his restless energy, a predator waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Around 8 o'clock, he made his move, a final desperate gambit. "You know, Arthur," he said, his voice carefully casual. "On second thought, I think I will have that glass of Macallan. And I poured a tiny one for you as well. Just a splash. We should have a toast. To family." He walked in from the kitchen holding 2 glasses. He was pushing, testing my resolve, perhaps hoping to add a sedative to my drink to guarantee my unconsciousness. It was a sloppy, desperate move. "Ethan, I appreciate the thought, But I really can't, I said, making a show of rubbing my temples. My head is starting to pound. I think it's time for that sleeping pill in bed for me. I saw the wave of relief wash over his face. It was so profound it was almost comical. My feigned weakness was his greatest reassurance. Of course, Arthur, he said, setting the glasses down. You need your rest. Don't let me keep you. I made a slow, theatrical production of climbing the stairs, gripping the banister like a man twice my age. From the top, I looked down. Don't stay up too late, I said. He just smiled and waved. In my bedroom, I went through the motions, but my true focus was on my phone, where the camera feed showed my empty study in perfect night vision clarity. I lay down on my bed, fully clothed, and pulled the covers up to my chest. I positioned myself so I could see the sliver of hallway visible through the slightly ajar door. Then, I began to wait. The minutes stretched into hours. I heard the low murmur of the television downstairs, the occasional rustle of Ethan moving around. He was being patient, letting the imaginary sleeping pill do its work. My own heart was a steady, rhythmic drum in my ears. I was not afraid. A man who has audited the accounts of liars and thieves for 3 decades learns to enjoy the moment before the deception unravels. At 2:43 in the morning, the house fell silent. The television clicked off. I heard the faint creak of a floorboard. It had begun. He moved with a practiced stealth, a ghost in my home, avoiding the spots on the stairs he knew would groan. His shadow fell across the sliver of light in my doorway. He stood there for a full minute, listening. I kept my breathing deep, and even the performance of a lifetime. Convinced I was lost to the world, he slipped into my study. I watched on my phone as his dark form moved with predatory confidence towards the antique desk. This was the moment. His hand reached for the second drawer. He was just seconds away from his prize, and his ruin. The drawer slid open with a soft, expensive whisper. On my phone screen, I saw Ethan's silhouette lean in, a dark shape radiating triumph. He believed he was at the finish line. His fingers, I imagined, were reaching for the small brass key that would solve all his problems. Then, my trap sprung. The explosion was not loud, but it was magnificent. A sharp, percussive thump, followed by a hiss, like a party favor crossed with a small cannon. It was the sound of justice, served with a festive flair. A glorious cloud of silver and gold glitter erupted from the drawer, engulfing Ethan in a shimmering vortex. The camera feed momentarily hazed over with the density of the glitter. I heard him stumble back with a violent curse, the sound muffled and shocked. The glitter settled, and the image on my phone cleared to reveal a masterpiece. He was no longer a thief in the night. He was a walking disco ball, a monument to bad decisions, sparkling from head to toe. "What the hell?" he gasped, his voice a strangled whisper as he frantically, uselessly, brushed at the thousands of tiny particles that now clung to his dark clothes, his hair, his stunned face. That was my cue. With the precision of an actor hitting his mark, I sat up in bed. "What on earth?" I called out, my voice thick with feigned sleep and alarm. What was that noise? I flicked on my bedside lamp. Light flooded the study, illuminating Ethan in all his glittering glory. He froze like a deer in the headlights, his hand still clutching the dummy key I'd planted as bait. "Ethan," I said, blinking with theatrical bewilderment, "what in God's name are you doing in my study?" He opened his mouth, but no words came out. Glitter cascaded from his hair like holiday snow. I heard a noise," he finally stammered. "I thought someone was breaking in." "Breaking in?" I asked, looking around the room with wide-eyed innocence. "And you decided to investigate my desk drawer?" Just then, we both heard it. The sound of a key in the front door. Footsteps in the entryway. "Dad?" Clara's voice called up the stairs. "I saw your study light on. Is everything okay?" "I came home early. The meeting ended sooner than I thought." Ethan's eyes widened in sheer panic. His alibi, the very reason for his carefully timed heist, had just walked through the front door. He was trapped. He was covered in evidence. And his audience was about to arrive. Clara appeared in the doorway, tying the belt of her robe, her expression a mixture of worry and confusion. Then she stopped. Her gaze took in the scene. me sitting up in bed looking alarmed, and her husband standing beside my open desk drawer, shimmering like a rejected Christmas ornament. "What in the world?" she breathed. "Ethan, why are you covered in glitter?" "It was a trap," he blurted out, his voice cracking. "Some kind of security device. I heard a noise and came to check on your father, and it went off." Clara's eyes narrowed. She was my daughter, and she had inherited my eye for inconsistency. A security device? In his desk drawer? At 3 in the morning? "I was looking for sleeping aids for you. I thought he might have some," he stammered, his story crumbling as he spoke it. "My medications," I interjected gently, "are in the bathroom cabinet. They always have been." The silence in the room was heavy, suffocating. Clara stared at her husband, and I could see the gears turning in her mind, connecting the dots of his strange behavior, his questions, his lies. "So you came into my father's private study while he was sleeping to look for medicine you knew wasn't there," she said, her voice dangerously quiet. "It's not like that." "Then what is it like, Ethan?" she shot back. "Because from where I am standing, it looks like you were robbing my father." He looked cornered, desperate. "Lauren, you have to trust me." It was time. "Clara," I said, my voice calm as I reached for my phone on the nightstand. "There's something you need to hear." Ethan's face turned white beneath the glitter. "Arthur, don't." "Don't what, Ethan?" Clara snapped, her eyes never leaving my face. "Dad, play it." I pressed play. Ethan's own voice, clear and damning, filled the room. "The old man's definitely loaded. I already have the safe key. The old fool keeps everything in there. My gambling debts aren't going away. Arthur's just some lonely old widower. He has no idea what's coming." I watched my daughter's face break. The recording played on, detailing the plan to use her book club as an alibi, to steal from me, to manipulate her into covering for him, and finally, to disappear and drag her with him. When I stopped the recording, Clara was staring at Ethan, silent tears streaming down her face. "Gambling debts?" she whispered. "You were going to rob my father and use me?" He sagged, the last of his fight draining out of him. "Lauren, I can fix this." "Get out," she said, her voice trembling but filled with steel. "What?" "Get out. Of my father's house. Now." He stood there for a moment, a defeated, sparkling fool. Then, without another word, he turned and walked out of the room, leaving a faint trail of glitter in his wake. We heard him in the guest room, the angry, violent sounds of him throwing his belongings into bags. Clara sank into the armchair in the corner of my study, her body shaking with silent sobs. I went to her, placing a hand on her shoulder. There were no words for a betrayal this deep. "I'm so sorry, Dad," she whispered, her voice choked with tears. "I brought him here. I trusted him. I put you in danger." I knelt beside her chair, looking into her tear-filled eyes. "Sweetheart, this is not your fault. You loved a man who wore a very convincing mask. Even the best of us can be fooled by a master liar." "But I should have seen it," she insisted. "The questions about money, the secret phone calls. I wanted to believe him." "That's what he counted on," I said softly. "He used your goodness, your trust, against you. That is his crime, Clara, not yours." We sat there in the quiet study, the glittering mess on the floor a testament to the chaos that had just torn through our lives. A few minutes later, Ethan appeared in the doorway, 2 hastily packed duffel bags in his hands. He still had flecks of gold on his cheeks. Clara stood up, wiping her eyes, her spine straight. "Leave your key on the kitchen counter," she said, her voice devoid of emotion. "Don't contact me again. My lawyer will be in touch." He opened his mouth to say something, perhaps one last, desperate plea, but he saw the look on her face and thought better of it. A moment later, we heard the front door slam shut, the sound echoing through the house with a brutal finality. Then, the roar of his car engine as he sped away into the night. The storm had passed. In its wake, there was only wreckage. 3 months later, the early spring sun was warming the brick facade of my Beacon Hill home. I was in the kitchen, making coffee, when Clara came downstairs, dressed for her new job at the Boston Public Library. The haunted look in her eyes had been replaced by a quiet, steady confidence. She had filed for divorce the day after Ethan left. He had contested nothing, disappearing under the weight of his debts and his shame. "Morning, Dad," she said, pouring herself a cup. "Morning, sweetheart." Sleep well? She smiled, a real smile that reached her eyes. Like a baby. You know, I was thinking, I don't think I've ever thanked you properly for the glitter bomb. I chuckled. My only regret is that the camera didn't capture his face at the exact moment of detonation. She leaned against the counter, sipping her coffee. He thought you were a fool, Dad. He had no idea he was dealing with a man who spent his life finding the truth in a world full of lies. You protected me, she continued, her voice soft, even when I couldn't see that I needed protecting. Thank you, Clara, I said, my own voice thick with emotion. That is what fathers do. After she left for the library, a new peaceful quiet settled over the house. It was no longer the lonely silence of a widower, but the serene quiet of a sanctuary, a home filled with truth and renewed love. The tension that had hummed beneath the floorboards for weeks was gone. Ethan's presence had been a discordant note, and now the house was back in harmony. My phone buzzed. It was a text from Clara. Mrs. Henderson from the library board wants to know if you'd be willing to teach a community workshop on personal financial security for seniors. Apparently, word of your innovative home protection methods has spread. I laughed out loud, a full, genuine laugh that echoed in the sunlit kitchen. Perhaps I had a new calling in my retirement after all. I looked around my home, at the familiar books, the comfortable chairs, the photographs of a life well lived. The betrayal had left a scar, there was no denying that. But sometimes a wound, when it heals, leaves you stronger than you were before. Ethan had seen an old man, an easy target. He failed to see the forensic accountant, the protector, the father. He thought he could steal my treasure, never understanding that my treasure wasn't locked in a safe. It was standing right in front of him, defending me with a strength he could never comprehend. Justice, I've learned, doesn't always come from a courtroom. Sometimes it's planned in a quiet workshop, triggered in a dusty drawer, and recorded on a hidden camera. And sometimes it sparkles. If you were captivated by this story, please show your support by liking this video and subscribing to the channel. We'd love to read your thoughts on Arthur's clever trap, so please share your impressions in the comments below. To listen to the next story, click on the video that appears on your screen. Thank you for watching.